By the late 13th century, Anatolia was a land of turmoil, a fragmented and unstable battleground where the remnants of old empires clashed with rising powers. Once the stronghold of the Byzantine Empire, this vast region had become a shattered mosaic of competing forces, ravaged by centuries of invasions and political strife. The Byzantines, who had ruled Anatolia for nearly 1,000 years, were now reduced to a few isolated outposts: Iznik, Bursa, and Izmit, mere echoes of their former dominance. To the east, the Mongol Empire's conquests had devastated the Anatolian Seljuk Sultanate, leaving behind a weakened and divided political structure. The once mighty Seljuks, who had held Anatolia since the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, were now little more than vassals of the Mongols, their authority confined to Konya and a few scattered strongholds. Their decline created a power vacuum, one that ambitious warlords and tribal leaders sought to exploit. Amidst this chaos, waves of Turkic migrants, fleeing from the Mongol onslaught in Central Asia and Persia, flooded into Anatolia. Many of these displaced peoples were warriors and nomads, fiercely independent tribes who sought new lands to settle, raid, and rule. Among these tribes was the Kayu, a branch of the Oghuz Turks that would bring one of the key figures in history, Osman Ghazi. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Osman Ghazi did not see himself as a mere chieftain of a wandering people. While most tribal leaders pursued short-term conquests, raiding, pillaging, and amassing wealth, Osman dreamed of something greater. He envisioned a unified state, a powerful entity that could serve as a beacon for the scattered Turkic tribes and challenge the crumbling Byzantine rule in Anatolia. However, Osman's rise to power was not an inevitability. He was not born into an established kingdom, nor did he inherit a vast domain. Instead, he built his power from the ground up, relying on his strategic brilliance, military skill, and an unshakable belief in his destiny. His story is one of persistence, resilience, and an unyielding ambition to carve a nation out of the fragmented remains of an empire. To fully understand Osman's rise, however, we must first go back even further, to the journey of his ancestors, the Kayu tribe, and their long and treacherous search for a homeland. The origins of Osman's people can be traced back to the Kayu, a branch of the Oghuz Turks, renowned for their military skill, discipline, and loyalty. The Kayu were among the most prestigious of the 24 Oghuz tribes, tracing their lineage back to the legendary founder of the Oghuz Turks, Oghuz Khan. The name Kayu itself means strong or mighty, and their emblem, a bow with 3 arrows, symbolized their warrior nature and their deep-rooted traditions of conquest and leadership. For generations, the Kayu had thrived as a nomadic people, moving across the vast steppes of Central Asia, following the rhythm of the seasons as they herded their flocks and trained for war. However, in the early 13th century, a force unlike any other emerged from the east, the Mongol Empire, led by Genghis Khan. By 1221, the Mongol horde had obliterated the Khwarezmian Empire, sending shockwaves through Persia and Central Asia. Cities that had once been bustling centers of Islamic learning and commerce, Samarkand, Bukhara, Merv, and Nishapur, were left in ruins, their populations massacred. Entire civilizations were uprooted in the face of Mongol expansion, and waves of refugees fled westward into the Islamic world. Among those fleeing were the Kayu, led by their bey, Suleiman Shah. Suleiman, like many Turkic leaders of the time, saw no future for his people in their ancestral lands. He understood that if the Kayu were to survive, they had to find a new home somewhere far from the Mongol onslaught. Thus began a harrowing migration, one that would take the Kayu across thousands of miles of unforgiving terrain, through mountains, deserts, and hostile territories. Their journey took them westward from Merv to Azerbaijan, where they sought temporary refuge. But the Mongols' relentless advance left them with no choice but to keep moving. Their journey eventually brought them to the lands near Ahlat in eastern Anatolia, where many displaced Turkic tribes had settled. However, this was not to be their final home. Suleiman Shah sought richer, more fertile lands for his people, and so, in 1236, he led the Kayu toward Syria, hoping to establish a new base of operations. But fate had other plans. As the Kayu attempted to cross the Euphrates River, tragedy struck. Suleiman Shah drowned, swept away by the rushing waters near Jabar Castle. His sudden death threw the Kayu into turmoil. Without their leader, the tribe fractured, and different factions made different decisions about their future. One group, uncertain of where to go next, chose to remain in Syria. Another group migrated south, blending into other Turkic communities. A third group, led by Suleiman Shah's sons, Ertugrul and Sungurtekin, pressed onward into Anatolia. With only 340 tents, a mere fraction of their former numbers, this small band of warriors set out in search of new lands, new allies, and a new destiny. By the mid-13th century, Anatolia was a battlefield, contested by multiple factions. While the Byzantines still controlled pockets of land in the west, much of central Anatolia was nominally under Seljuk rule. However, the Seljuks themselves were weakened, their power eroded by Mongol overlordship and internal divisions. For the Kayu, this was both a danger and an opportunity. Danger, because the region was lawless, and they would have to navigate a deadly game of shifting alliances and betrayals. But this brought a lot of opportunities, because a strong and ambitious leader could carve out his own domain, independent of both the Byzantines and the Mongols. Ertugrul, now the head of the Kayu, understood this better than anyone. He had inherited a small and vulnerable tribe, but he also had warriors willing to fight, and a vision for something greater. To survive, he needed to find a powerful ally, one who could grant them land and protection. Ertugrul, aware that the Seljuk Sultanate still held nominal control over Anatolia, sought their support and legitimacy. In 1240, he sent an envoy to Sultan Alaeddin Kikubad, ruler of the Anatolian Seljuks, offering the services of the Kayu warriors in exchange for land. The Sultan, impressed by Ertugrul's courage and the military prowess of the Kayu, granted them a small but strategically vital region near Sogut, on the Byzantine frontier. This changed everything. Sogut was no ordinary settlement. It was a frontier outpost, a buffer against Byzantine incursions, a gateway to expansion that positioned the Kayu for future conquests. This decision would prove pivotal, not only for the survival of the Kayu tribe, but for the future of the Ottoman Empire. Here, Ertugrul's leadership flourished. The tribe transformed Sogut into a thriving settlement and earned the loyalty of neighboring Turkic clans. Ertugrul himself became a trusted ally of the Seljuks, distinguishing himself in battles against both Mongol and Byzantine forces. Under Ertugrul's leadership, the Kayu began to grow in strength, launching raids on Byzantine lands and asserting themselves as a new power in Anatolia. He would prove himself in the upcoming Battle of Karakahisar. By the mid-13th century, Anatolia was in a state of near-constant warfare, as the declining Byzantine Empire and the Anatolian Seljuks struggled to maintain control over the lands between the Aegean and central Anatolia. As Mongol forces pushed westward and Byzantine strongholds weakened, many Turkic tribes found themselves in a position to seize new territories and carve out independent domains. It was in this environment that Osman Ghazi, the leader of the Kayu tribe, established himself as a formidable force. Among the most important battles in Ertugrul's career was the siege of Karakahisar, a strategic Byzantine fortress located in the western Anatolian highlands. Controlling key trade routes and serving as an important defensive outpost for the Byzantine frontier, Karacahisar had long been a thorn in the side of the Anatolian Seljuks. For Sultan Alaeddin, bringing this fortress under Seljuk control was crucial, as it would secure the borderlands against Byzantine incursions and open the path for further expansion. The Karacahisar fortress, perched on a rocky hill, was well fortified and difficult to approach. Its position allowed the Byzantines to monitor and control trade routes passing through Bilecik, Eskişehir, and Sogut, which were vital economic and military hubs. The fortress was also used as a staging point for raids into Seljuk-controlled territories, often disrupting the stability of the region. For Ertugrul and his Kayu warriors, Karacahisar represented both a threat and an opportunity. If the Byzantines continued to hold it, they could launch devastating attacks on Turkish settlements, preventing further expansion. However, if the fortress fell to the Seljuks, it would not only strengthen Ertugrul's position in the region, but also prove his loyalty and military prowess to the Seljuk Sultan. In 1243, the Seljuks mustered an army under Sultan Alaeddin Keykubat to lay siege to Karacahisar. Knowing that a direct assault on the fortress's walls would be costly, the Sultan entrusted Ertugrul with leading the frontier forces in a campaign of raiding and harassment against the Byzantines. Ertugrul's strategy was bold and unconventional. Rather than engaging in a prolonged, direct siege, he targeted the supply routes that kept Karacahisar operational. His Alps, expert riders, and skilled ambush fighters launched hit-and-run raids, cutting off reinforcements and supply caravans. These attacks created panic and disorder among the defenders, forcing them to ration their food and stretch their resources thin. To further weaken the fortress's defenses, Ertugrul deployed night raids against nearby Byzantine outposts, burning grain stores and intercepting couriers. He knew that the key to victory was starvation and exhaustion, forcing the garrison to surrender without engaging in a costly frontal assault. As weeks turned into months, the situation inside Karacahisar deteriorated. The Byzantines, deprived of reinforcements and supplies, could no longer sustain their defenses. The Seljuk forces, now ready for a final attack, moved their siege engines into position and tightened the blockade. Realizing that defeat was inevitable, the Byzantine commander of the fortress attempted to sue for peace, offering to surrender in exchange for safe passage. However, the Seljuks refused, demanding unconditional surrender. In a desperate last stand, the remaining Byzantine forces attempted a breakout, but they were cut down by the combined Seljuk and Kayu warriors. By the end of the campaign, Karacahisar had fallen, marking a major victory for Ertugrul and the Seljuks. The fortress, once a symbol of Byzantine strength in the region, now belonged to the Turks. Sultan Alaeddin, grateful for Ertugrul's decisive role in the campaign, rewarded him with new lands near Bilecik. More importantly, he granted Ertugrul the title of Chief Raider, officially recognizing him as the Seljuk ruler of the frontier region. This title was a game-changer for Ertugrul and his descendants. It gave him the right to conduct independent military campaigns, collect taxes, and establish his own administration. In effect, the Kayu tribe had become a semi-independent entity, free to expand into Byzantine territories under Seljuk protection. With Karacahisar secured, Ertugrul set his sights on new conquests, further expanding his territory and influence. As Ertugrul's power and influence expanded, his youngest son, Osman, was growing up in the rugged frontier lands of Sogut. From an early age, Osman was immersed in the world of war and governance, witnessing firsthand the struggles and triumphs of his father's campaigns. But Osman's education was not solely in the art of war. His father recognized the importance of wisdom and spirituality, ensuring that Osman was also trained in the teachings of Islam, governance, and leadership. Among the most influential figures in Osman's youth was Sheikh Edebali, a prominent Sufi scholar and spiritual leader in Anatolia. A pivotal moment in Osman's formative years occurred when he was sent to the Seljuk court in Konya, the capital of the Anatolian Seljuks. It was here that he encountered one of the most revered scholars of the Islamic world, Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi. According to tradition, Osman met Mevlana Rumi on the palace steps, where the great mystic observed the young bey with keen interest. Mevlana, known for his deep insight into human nature, saw in Osman a leader destined for greatness. Struck by Osman's humility and intelligence, Mevlana Rumi took him under his wing, teaching him about the importance of justice, faith, and wisdom in leadership. He emphasized that a ruler must not only be a warrior, but also a protector of the weak, a just administrator, and a servant of the people. It is said that Mevlana Rumi blessed Osman, prophesying that his lineage would one day inherit the Islamic Sultanate and establish a great empire. This moment, deeply etched in Osman's mind, imbued him with a sense of divine purpose, the belief that his struggles and conquests would serve a higher calling. Inspired by the teachings of Mevlana Rumi and Sheikh Edebali, Osman matured into a leader who valued justice as much as strength. This philosophy of governance, blending military might with spiritual wisdom, would become a defining feature of the Ottoman state. His time would come sooner than he expected. The death of Ertugrul Ghazi in 1281 marked a turning point for the Kayu tribe. For nearly half a century, Ertugrul had guided his people through warfare, diplomacy, and migration, securing land and autonomy on the Byzantine frontier under the protection of the Anatolian Seljuks. However, his passing left the tribe at a crossroads. Would the Kayu continue along the path Ertugrul had set, or would they fracture under new leadership? At the time of his father's death, Osman was still a young warrior, but he had already begun to distinguish himself through his courage, tactical brilliance, and leadership. However, his ascension to power was not without controversy. Although Osman was Ertugrul's youngest son, he was chosen as his successor. This decision, however, was not unanimously accepted within the Kayu tribe. Traditional Turkic customs dictated that leadership should pass to the eldest or most experienced son, leading to tension among rival factions within the tribe. Some Kayu chieftains favored Osman's older brother, Gündüz Bey, believing he had more experience in governance. Others supported Sungur Tekin, who had lived at the Seljuk court and had close ties to the ruling sultans. Yet Osman's charisma, ambition, and military success had already won him the loyalty of many Kayu warriors, particularly the younger generation eager to expand their territory. He embodied the spirit of the frontier, where courage, not birthright, determined leadership. In a decisive council meeting, Osman's closest advisors, including Sheikh Edebali, Akçakoka, Konaralp, and Turgut Alp, rallied behind him. His natural leadership abilities and grand vision for the Kayu tribe ultimately swayed the decision in his favor. Once Osman was chosen, Gündüz Bey and Sungur Tekin accepted the outcome, avoiding the bitter rivalries that often plague succession in Turkic tribes. In doing so, the Kayu tribe ensured its unity and survival at a crucial moment in its history. Though Osman had secured leadership, he inherited a principality beset by challenges. The political landscape of Anatolia was unstable, and Osman had to navigate a delicate balance of power among his more powerful neighbors. To the west, Byzantine landlords and garrisons still controlled fortified cities such as Bilecik, Inegöl, and Karacahisar. These towns, remnants of the once mighty Byzantine Empire, had endured despite their empire's decline. To the east, the Anatolian Seljuk Sultanate, once the dominant power in the region, was now a puppet state under Mongol rule. The Seljuks had lost much of their authority, and their power was waning. To the north and south, various Turkic beyliks, including the Germianids, Karamanids, and Karisi, were vying for influence, each seeking to expand their territories. Osman's principality in Sogut was small and relatively isolated, but its position along the Byzantine border provided him with a unique advantage: the opportunity for expansion. Osman was a true frontier warrior, molded by the turbulent environment of Anatolia. The lands of Bithynia, where he now ruled, were ripe for conquest. Unlike other Turkish rulers, who focused on securing alliances and defending existing territories, Osman saw endless opportunity in the chaos. While other beyliks turned inward, fighting each other for dominance, Osman focused on expanding westward into Byzantine lands. The Byzantines, weakened by internal struggles and declining military strength, were unable to mount an effective defense against the rising power of the Kayu warriors. Osman embraced the frontier warrior ethos, the idea that Ghazis were destined to fight for Islam against the infidels. Inspired by his spiritual mentor, Sheikh Edebali, Osman framed his conquests as a sacred duty, rallying his people under the banner of Islam and Turkish unity. With the Byzantines weakened and the Seljuks declining, Osman realized that he had been given a rare opportunity, the chance to carve out a new, independent state from the ashes of old empires. Determined to seize the moment, Osman wasted no time in preparing for war. He gathered his most trusted warriors, including Turgut Alp, Konaralp, and Akçakaka, and set his sights on the Byzantine strongholds that surrounded Sogut. The first test of his leadership would come soon enough. As Osman's power grew, the Byzantine landlords saw him as a growing threat. Among them was Nikola, the powerful ruler of Ertugrul, who would become Osman's first great rival. Osman's rise was no longer just the story of a tribal leader seeking to expand his territory. It was the beginning of a new state, one that would eventually grow into an empire spanning 3 continents. The war for Bithynia had begun. By the late 13th century, Osman Ghazi's ambitions had begun to reshape the landscape of northwestern Anatolia. His principality, though still in its infancy, was becoming an undeniable force on the Byzantine frontier. The Ottomans were no longer just a small band of Turkic raiders. They had transformed into an organized and expanding power. However, with growth came enemies. Among the Byzantine landlords who still controlled the fortresses of Bithynia, one man stood out as Osman's first major rival, Nikola, the powerful ruler of Angelakoma. Osman's expansion into Byzantine territory had not gone unnoticed. The Byzantine lords of Bithynia, who had ruled these lands for centuries, saw Osman's growing power as a direct threat to their authority. They had tolerated Turkic mercenaries and raiders in the past, but Osman was different. He was not just a warlord, he was building a state. Among those most alarmed by Osman's rise was Nikola, who controlled Angelakoma and several surrounding fortresses. A seasoned commander and a shrewd strategist, Nikola understood that if Osman was left unchecked, he would soon dominate the entire region. In an effort to contain Osman's expansion, Nikola launched a series of harassing raids on Kayu settlements near Soyut and Domanis. His forces burned farmlands and grain stores, attempting to starve the Kayu out, ambushed Ottoman patrols, eliminating scouts and disrupting communications, and attacked caravans and supply lines, crippling the tribe's ability to sustain itself. For Osman, these provocations were intolerable. So, the heart of his principality depended on trade and agriculture. If Nikola was allowed to continue his attacks, the stability of the Kayu Beylik would be in jeopardy. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, Osman convened a war council with his most trusted commanders. Together, they devised a plan to confront Nikola and put an end to his aggression. Osman knew that defeating Nikola would not be simple. Angelakoma was well fortified, and the Byzantines had numerical superiority. Instead of launching a direct siege, Osman decided to draw Nikola into battle in a more favorable setting. Osman's plan was bold. He would march his forces toward Angelakoma, making it appear as though he intended to attack the fortress directly. This would force Nicola to respond by sending out his forces to intercept the Ottomans before they could lay siege. What Osman did not know, however, was that Nicola had anticipated this move. Instead of waiting inside the walls of Angelicoma, Nicola had prepared an ambush at Ermenibeli, a narrow valley just outside the town. The valley's steep cliffs and dense forests made it an ideal location for a trap. The Byzantines could strike from the high ground, while Ottoman forces would be bottlenecked in the valley below. As Osman and his men advanced through the valley, Byzantine archers hidden among the rocks rained down arrows from above. The Byzantine infantry, waiting on the slopes, charged down the hills, surrounding the Ottomans on both sides. The battle was brutal. Caught in a disadvantageous position, the Ottomans struggled to break through the Byzantine lines. The Byzantines had the upper hand, pressing forward with their heavily armored cavalry. Among the Ottoman casualties was Bey Hoca, Osman's nephew and one of his most promising young warriors. Bey Hoca had been one of Osman's closest companions, and his loss was a devastating blow to the Kayyu morale. Despite the grim situation, Osman refused to surrender. Gathering his remaining warriors, he led a desperate charge through a weakened section of the Byzantine line. After a fierce struggle, he managed to break free from the encirclement, retreating back to Sot with his surviving forces. The Battle of Ermenibeli was Osman's first major defeat, but it was not a decisive one. Although the Byzantines had won the day, they had failed to destroy Osman's army. For Nicola, the victory was not complete. Osman had escaped, and despite suffering losses, the Kayyu tribe remained intact. Moreover, Nicola's forces had taken casualties as well, preventing them from launching a full-scale invasion of Suyut. For Osman, the defeat at Ermenibeli was a painful lesson, one that would shape his future strategies. He had underestimated Nicola's tactical prowess, and he had learned firsthand the dangers of fighting in terrain not suited to his cavalry-based forces. Though the battle had ended in a stalemate, Osman did not see it as the end of the conflict. If anything, Nicola's victory had only strengthened Osman's resolve. Vowing to avenge Bey Hoca and secure the Kayyu's frontier, Osman immediately began preparations for a renewed offensive against Angelicoma. But this time, he would not make the same mistake. Instead of rushing into battle, Osman took a more calculated approach. He strengthened alliances with neighboring Turkic tribes, ensuring a larger army for the next campaign. Osman studied Nicola's defensive positions, identifying weak points in the Byzantine fortifications, and devised new tactics, incorporating guerrilla warfare and prolonged sieges instead of head-on confrontations. Osman's defeat at Ermenibeli was only the beginning. The war for Angelicoma was far from over, and the Byzantines had not yet seen the full might of the Kayyu warriors. Soon, Osman would return, and this time, he would ensure that Nicola's reign over Ertugrul came to an end, forever. Angelicoma stood as a major obstacle to Osman's continued expansion and ambitions. The town's Byzantine lord, Nicola, had already proven to be a dangerous adversary, defeating Osman's forces at the ambush of Ermenibeli. However, Osman was a leader who learned from his failures. Instead of launching a reckless attack on Angelicoma, he turned his attention to a smaller, yet strategically vital target, the fortress of Kulakahisar. Kulakahisar was more than just a fortress. It was the gateway to Angelicoma. Situated just 5 kilometers east of Angelicoma, it guarded the approach to the town. The fortress housed a significant Byzantine garrison, serving as a military outpost that could intercept Ottoman movements. It was heavily fortified, boasting thick stone walls, wooden watchtowers, and a garrison of trained Byzantine soldiers. And more importantly, the fortress secured Byzantine supply lines, allowing provisions and reinforcements to be sent from other strongholds in the region. Osman understood that if he attacked Angelicoma directly, the Byzantines would simply reinforce it from Kulakahisar. However, if Kulakahisar was taken first, Nikola would be left defenseless, his stronghold cut off from the rest of the Byzantine network. Realizing that a direct assault on Kulakahisar's fortified walls would be costly, Osman devised a bold and unconventional strategy. Instead of laying a prolonged siege which could take months, Osman opted for a surprise attack under the cover of night. His plan relied on stealth, deception, and precision, qualities that had made the Ottomans such dangerous opponents in the frontier wars. Osman handpicked a small band of his most elite warriors, disguising them as Byzantine soldiers. These warriors, fluent in Greek and familiar with Byzantine military customs, would infiltrate the fortress by pretending to be a returning patrol. Dressed in captured Byzantine armor and cloaks, the Ottoman infiltrators approached the fortress gates under the guise of a scouting party returning from patrol. Speaking in fluent Greek, they convinced the gatekeepers to open the main gate. As soon as the gate swung open, the Ottoman warriors struck, silencing the guards before they could raise the alarm. With the gate secured from the inside, Osman and his 450 warriors stormed the fortress. Scaling ladders were deployed, allowing Ottoman soldiers to climb the walls while Byzantine defenders were still in a state of confusion. Turgut Alp led a frontal charge toward the main courtyard, cutting down Byzantine troops as they scrambled to arm themselves. The Byzantines, caught off guard, attempted to rally, but Osman's swift tactics prevented them from forming a proper defense. Within a matter of hours, the fortress had fallen, and the Ottoman flag was raised over Kulakahisar. Osman did not simply capture Kulakahisar, he destroyed it. The fortress was set ablaze, its walls demolished, ensuring that it could never be used against the Ottomans again. Byzantine prisoners were given a choice: join the Ottomans or be expelled. Many of the local Greek population chose to stay, recognizing Osman's policy of tolerance and his ability to protect them from the constant warfare that plagued the frontier. The fall of Kulakahisar was a major turning point. Without its defensive garrison, Angelicoma was now completely exposed. Nikola was forced to withdraw his remaining troops, pulling them back behind the walls of Angelicoma itself. News of Osman's victory spread quickly, bolstering his reputation as an unstoppable leader and attracting more Turkic warriors to his cause. But this triumph came with consequences. The Byzantine landlords, realizing the growing Ottoman threat, began plotting their counterattack. The fall of Kulakahisar sent shockwaves through the Byzantine territories of Bithynia. Nikola, now on the defensive, desperately sought aid from his Byzantine allies. He knew that if Osman was not stopped, it would only be a matter of time before Angelicoma itself fell into Ottoman hands. Nikola sent an urgent plea for reinforcements to the Lord of Karakahisar, another major Byzantine fortress in the region. Recognizing the danger posed by Osman, the two commanders formed an alliance, rallying an army numbering in the thousands. Their objective was clear: eradicate Osman's principality before it could grow any stronger. Osman, ever the strategist, anticipated the Byzantine response. Rather than waiting to be attacked, he began preparing his defenses. Key settlements like Sot were fortified, with barricades and watchtowers built around entry points. Guerrilla forces were stationed in forests and mountain passes, ready to ambush enemy supply lines, and messengers were sent to neighboring Turkic clans, calling for reinforcements. Osman's forces were smaller, but they had a crucial advantage. They were fighting on familiar terrain. Instead of facing the Byzantine army head-on, Osman's plan was to draw them into the mountainous terrain near Domanis, where their numerical superiority would be nullified. The battle for Ottoman survival was about to begin. The Byzantine army marched towards Sot, determined to crush the Ottoman uprising once and for all. Two powerful lords had combined their forces, bringing thousands of Byzantine soldiers to bear against Osman's far smaller army. But numbers alone do not win wars. Osman had proven time and again that his superior strategy, knowledge of the terrain, and unwavering faith in his cause could overcome even the mightiest adversaries. As the Byzantine army closed in, Osman and his warriors stood ready, prepared to fight not just for their own survival, but for the future of an empire yet to be born. And so, as the two armies faced off on the rugged hills of Dominus, the next great chapter of Osman's legendary journey was about to unfold. As Osman Ghazi's influence expanded, the fragile balance of power in northwestern Anatolia teetered on the edge of collapse. His victory at Kulakahisar had sent shockwaves through the Byzantine strongholds of Bithynia, shaking the confidence of the Christian lords who had ruled the region for centuries. The Tekfur of Ertugrul, having already suffered humiliating setbacks at the hands of Osman, was now in a desperate position. The Byzantine landlords could no longer ignore the rise of the Ottomans, nor could they dismiss Osman as just another raiding warlord. He had proven himself not only a skilled warrior, but also a masterful strategist. For the Byzantine commanders, inaction was no longer an option. If they waited, Osman would continue his march, toppling one fortress after another until their entire domain fell under his banner. A decision had to be made, and it had to be made quickly. Realizing the severity of the threat, the Tekfur of Ertugrul sent a plea to the Lord of Kulakahisar, urging him to join forces in a final attempt to destroy Osman before it was too late. Why do you wait still? They will take you, your generation, and your province. These are not simple Sufi Turkmens, whom we could ignore or tolerate. If we do not act now, regret will serve no purpose. The message was a stark warning, one that resonated deeply among the remaining Byzantine leaders. Osman's victories had not only weakened Byzantine defenses, but also undermined their authority over their own subjects. Many local Greeks, weary of Byzantine taxation and ineffective leadership, had begun aligning themselves with Osman, seeing him as a capable and just ruler rather than an invader. Recognizing the threat Osman posed, the Tekfurs of Ertugrul and Kulakahisar forged a coalition, pooling their resources and manpower to mount an offensive against the Kayu. Their combined forces, numbering around 2,000 men, included heavily armed Byzantine infantry, known for their discipline and defensive formations, elite cavalry, drawn from both local Byzantine knights and mercenaries, and auxiliary troops, consisting of Greek militia and Armenian archers, providing range support. Their combined forces assembled in the Sogut and Domanus regions. Their objective was clear: eradicate Osman's forces and crush his principality before it could gain any more ground. Osman, however, was no stranger to Byzantine plots. His network of spies and informants, embedded within the Byzantine frontier towns, relayed news of the coming attack. The intelligence allowed Osman to act swiftly, calling upon his core force of Kayu warriors, numbering around 700 men, all highly mobile and battle-hardened, tribal allies, including Turkmen horse archers, skilled in hit-and-run tactics, as well seasoned commanders, such as Turgut Alp, Konur Alp, and Osman Ghazi, whose knowledge of the rugged terrain would play a crucial role in the battle. Though outnumbered nearly 3-1, Osman's men held a distinct advantage. They were fighting on their own ground, in the rugged, mountainous terrain of Domanis. Rather than meeting the Byzantine army on open ground, where their cavalry and heavy infantry could dominate, Osman chose a battlefield that suited his strengths: the forests and highlands near Domanis. This location offered narrow passes, which would limit the effectiveness of Byzantine cavalry charges. Dense forests, perfect for ambushes, and guerrilla tactics, and steep hills, from which Ottoman archers and horsemen could attack with impunity before withdrawing. Osman's plan was simple, but deadly. Draw the Byzantines into the hills, exhaust them, and then strike when they were vulnerable. The Byzantines advanced with confidence, expecting to overwhelm the outnumbered Ottomans. However, they soon found themselves marching deeper into enemy-controlled territory, where every tree, hill, and ravine concealed hidden dangers. Suddenly, arrows rained down from the slopes, striking the Byzantine vanguard. Turkmen horse archers, concealed within the forest, darted in and out, launching volleys of arrows before disappearing into the trees. The Byzantine commanders, frustrated by the lack of a clear enemy, ordered their troops to press forward, believing they could push through the ambush and reach open ground. But as the main Byzantine force moved forward, they fell directly into Osman's trap. At a narrow valley where the Byzantine column was most vulnerable, Osman sprung his counterattack. Konuralp and Osman Ghazi led a charge from the flanks, attacking the Byzantine rear and supply lines. Turgut Alp's cavalry, waiting on a hidden ridge, descended upon the center of the Byzantine formation, cutting it in half. Osman himself, fighting in the thick of battle, led his warriors in a frontal charge, striking at the demoralized Byzantine forces. The initial attack threw the Byzantines into chaos, but their numerical superiority soon became evident. Their disciplined infantry, armed with shields and spears, formed defensive lines to repel the Caillou assault. The Byzantine cavalry, though limited in number, attempted to flank Osman's forces. The battle devolved into brutal, close-quarters combat. Swords clashed, and the forest floor was stained with blood. The Caillou warriors fought with ferocity, spurred by their belief in the justice of their cause. However, the Byzantines' greater numbers began to take a toll. Amid the chaos, Osman's brother, Suruba II, led a daring charge into the enemy's ranks. His bravery inspired the Caillou, but it came at a cost. Struck by a Byzantine spear, Suruba II fell, mortally wounded. The sight of their fallen hero enraged the Caillou warriors. Fueled by grief and anger, they redoubled their efforts. The Byzantines, exhausted and disoriented, attempted to reform their lines, but the chaos of the ambush left them leaderless. As the Ottoman warriors pushed forward, the Byzantine army crumbled, first in sections, then in total collapse. The Greek militia and Armenian auxiliaries broke first, fleeing into the forest where they were hunted down by Osman's horsemen. The Byzantine heavy infantry, unable to maneuver in the dense terrain, were surrounded and slaughtered. It was a complete disaster. The Tekfur of Inagol, seeing the battle lost, attempted to retreat, but he was cut down before he could escape. The remaining Byzantine troops scattered, abandoning their weapons, armor, and supplies as they fled the battlefield. The Battle of Domanus was more than just another victory for Osman. It was a turning point. The Byzantine lords of Bithynia had suffered a devastating defeat, one they would never fully recover from. Osman's reputation soared, drawing even more warriors to his cause. The Ottoman Principality, once a small frontier state, had now become a rising power, a growing force that no longer just raided Byzantine lands but actively conquered them. With the Byzantine army shattered, the door to further conquest stood open. Osman wasted no time in capitalizing on his victory. In the aftermath of the battle, he turned his sights on Karakahisar, determined to deal the Byzantines another crushing blow. And so, with the embers of Domanus still smoldering, Osman marched forward, setting into motion the events that would ultimately lead to the birth of the Ottoman Empire. This was no longer just a frontier war. It was the beginning of a dynasty that would reshape the world for centuries to come. The defeat of the Byzantine coalition at Domanus was a decisive turning point for Osman Ghazi and his fledgling state. No longer just a raiding frontier bey, he had demonstrated his ability to outmaneuver and crush superior Byzantine forces. His growing reputation now sent shockwaves across the region, compelling both his allies and enemies to take notice. Flush with victory, Osman did not allow the Byzantines time to recover. Rather than resting on his laurels, he took the initiative, launching a relentless campaign aimed at breaking Byzantine resistance in Bithynia once and for all. His next target was Karakahisar, a heavily fortified stronghold that had long served as a key Byzantine outpost, controlling important trade routes and military movements in the region. Capturing Karakahhisar would eliminate the last major Byzantine resistance in Osman's immediate sphere of influence, secure a key strategic fortress, ensuring the Ottomans' dominance in northwestern Anatolia, and demonstrate Osman's ability to besiege and capture major Byzantine strongholds, proving that his conquests were not just a series of small skirmishes, but part of a larger state-building vision. According to tradition, the castle was conquered by Ertugrul in 1232 on behalf of Sultan Aladdin when the latter had to leave to face the Mongol invasions of Anatolia, preceding Ertugrul's settlement in Sogut. We discussed this battle in our previous part. However, it seems that it was only a siege or small-scale battle, not full conquest. However, based on historical sources, Karakahhisar Castle was conquered twice, both in the period of Ertugrul Ghazi and the period of Osman Ghazi. Osman knew that Karakahhisar would not fall easily. Unlike Kulakahhisar and Angelakoma, which were relatively small fortresses, Karakahhisar was a true citadel, with thick stone walls, well-supplied garrisons, and a defensive layout designed to withstand prolonged sieges. But Osman was undeterred. He gathered his most trusted warriors set out to encircle the fortress. As Osman's forces encamped around Karakahhisar, news of the siege spread rapidly across Anatolia. The Byzantines, desperate to hold their last major fortress in the region, reinforced the garrison, determined to resist Osman at all costs. At the same time, word of Osman's exploits had reached Ghayaseddin Masud, the Anatolian Seljuk Sultan. The Seljuks, though weakened by Mongol overlordship, still maintained nominal authority over Anatolia, and Masud recognized that Osman's victories were reshaping the power dynamics of the region. Masud saw an opportunity. By supporting Osman, he could align himself with a rising power and reassert Seljuk influence over the frontier lands. Thus, the Seljuk Sultan personally marched from Konya, bringing with him a reinforcement army equipped with siege engines, including catapults and battering rams, weapons Osman had never before used in a siege. With the Seljuks now at his side, Osman's forces tightened the noose around Karakahhisar, cutting off its supply routes and isolating its defenders. For 3 days, the Seljuk-Ottoman alliance launched relentless assaults on the fortress. Catapults hurled stones at the walls, weakening them with each impact. Archers rained arrows down on the defenders, forcing them to remain behind their battlements, and infantry launched repeated attacks on the gates, testing the resilience of the Byzantine garrison. Despite these efforts, the fortress held firm. The Byzantine defenders fought with desperation, repelling several Ottoman assaults and inflicting heavy casualties. Then, on the 4th day, unexpected news reached the Seljuk camp. Tatars had attacked Ertugrul, a major Seljuk city, leaving it devastated and in flames. This forced Sultan Masud into a dilemma: continue supporting Osman in the siege of Karakahhisar or return to Anatolia to deal with the Tatar threat. After much deliberation, the Sultan made his decision. He would leave the siege in Osman's hands. In a ceremonial gathering inside his command tent, Masud called Osman before him and, in the presence of Seljuk commanders, declared, "Son of Ertugrul, you have many signs of happiness. There is nobody in the world who can resist you and your generation. My prayers are with you." With these words, the Sultan entrusted the siege to Osman, gifting him the siege engines and officially recognizing his leadership in the region. Now commanding the siege alone, Osman redoubled his efforts. Using the Seljuk siege engines, his forces weakened the city's defenses, battering its walls relentlessly. With patience and discipline, the Ottomans exploited weak points in the fortress, slowly wearing down the defenders. Finally, after weeks of siege, Osman ordered the final assault. Under the cover of darkness, the Ottoman warriors stormed Karakahhisar, scaling its battered walls and breaking through its gates. The battle raged inside the city, with street-to-street combat erupting as Byzantine defenders made a final stand. However, Osman's forces were relentless. By dawn, the last Byzantine resistance had collapsed. The Tekfur of Karakahhisar was captured and executed, and Osman's banner now flew over the city. One of Osman's first acts as the new ruler of Karakahhisar was to convert its main church into a mosque. For the first time, the call to prayer echoed through the city's streets. Islamic scholars and Turkmen families were invited to settle in Karakahhisar, marking its transformation into an Islamic stronghold. Many Christians, impressed by Osman's governance and tolerance, chose to remain, some even converting to Islam over time. To cement his authority, Osman appointed his trusted nephew, Aktimur, as the governor of the newly conquered city. The victory at Karakhisar was more than just a military triumph. It was a defining moment in Osman's rise to power. He had proven his ability to conduct large-scale sieges, not just quick raids, had earned the trust of the Seljuk Sultan, further legitimizing his leadership, and had captured a major Byzantine stronghold, expanding Ottoman control deeper into Bithynia. Most importantly, the conquest of Karakhisar established Osman as a state builder, not just a warrior. With the Byzantine presence in the region further weakened, the road to even greater conquest lay open before him. The events at Karakahhisar marked a new era for Osman's principality. The Ottomans were no longer just raiders. They were state builders, rulers, and conquerors. But greater challenges remained. Would Osman continue his campaign of expansion? Could he maintain unity among his growing number of warriors and allies? With his sword sharpened and his vision clear, Osman set his sights on the next great challenge, the Byzantine stronghold of Bilecik. The Ottoman rise had only just begun. With the conquest of Karakahhisar, Osman Ghazi solidified his position as a rising power in Anatolia. The city's transformation into an Islamic hub under his rule was emblematic of the justice and tolerance that would define his leadership. Muslims were settled in the newly conquered city, and Osman appointed Dursun Faki, a disciple of Sheikh Edebali, as the city's first Qadi and Imam. The Christian population, accustomed to the exploitative rule of their former lords, found themselves under a governance marked by fairness and respect. The result was profound. Christian citizens began inviting their counterparts from surrounding areas to join them in Karakahhisar, fostering peaceful dialogue and cooperation between Muslims and Christians under Osman's administration. Osman's policies were deeply influenced by the principles of Caliph Omar ibn al-Khattab, emphasizing justice, protection of rights, and governance that transcended religious boundaries. His leadership turned Karakhisar into a thriving city. Roads became safer, trade flourished, and prosperity spread throughout the region. As word of Osman's fair rule spread, his influence extended far beyond his borders, shaking the confidence of Byzantine lords in neighboring cities like Bursa and Iznik. While Osman was consolidating his power, Anatolia was thrown into chaos by a rebellion within the Ilkhanate, the Mongol-controlled region encompassing much of Persia and eastern Anatolia. In 1298, the Mongol governor of Anatolia, Suleymish, rebelled against Ghazan Khan, the ruler of the Ilkhanate. Suleymish commanded an army of 50,000 troops and found support among Turkic Mujahideen in Anatolia and 20,000 Mamluk cavalry sent from Egypt. The rebellion culminated in a decisive battle on the plains of Erzincan Akshahir, where Suleymish's forces were crushed by an Ilkhanid army under the command of Kutlu Khan. The defeat led to the dispersal of Suleymish's army, with many of his surviving soldiers fleeing westward to escape Mongol retaliation. A significant number of these Turkic Mujahideen found refuge in Osman's lands. swelling the ranks of his growing army. The rebellion also caused political instability in Anatolia. The Seljuk Sultan, Alaeddin Kaykubat III, abandoned his throne and fled, leaving the Sultanate effectively leaderless. With the collapse of centralized Seljuk authority, Anatolia fractured into a mosaic of independent principalities. For Osman, this power vacuum presented an opportunity to assert greater independence, transitioning from a vassal of the Seljuks to a ruler in his own right. Having secured his rule over Karakahisar, Osman was now looking ahead. Though he was still technically a Seljuk vassal, the declining power of the Seljuk Sultanate meant that he had to carve out his own destiny. His next move? Expanding into the nearby Byzantine-ruled regions of Ertugrul and Goynuk, two strategically significant towns in northwestern Anatolia. Both Ertugrul and Goynuk were key trade hubs that connected Byzantine cities like Bursa and Iznik to the Black Sea coast, vital for logistics, acting as supply and reinforcement routes for Byzantine garrisons. And more importantly, both cities were lightly defended, offering Osman an easy opportunity to weaken Byzantine infrastructure without engaging in a costly siege. Rather than launching a full-scale assault, Osman relied on mobility and surprise, using hit-and-run tactics to destabilize the Byzantines. He sent small bands of 500 warriors, led by his most trusted commanders Akçakoka, Konureip, and Osman Ghazi, to harass Byzantine supply convoys and outposts. Byzantine merchants were intercepted, and their goods were either confiscated or forced to be sold under Ottoman taxation. Communication lines between Bursa and Iznik were severed, further isolating Byzantine strongholds in the region. The Byzantines, caught off guard and unable to defend every road and outpost, struggled to mount an effective response. After months of relentless raids, Osman's forces swooped in for the final blow. Ertugrul fell first, with minimal resistance, as its garrison lacked reinforcements from nearby Byzantine strongholds. Goynuk followed soon after, with Byzantine defenders abandoning the city rather than facing Osman's forces in open battle. The Ottomans now controlled a major corridor between Karakahisar and the Byzantine cities of Bursa and Iznik, further isolating Byzantine territories in Bithynia. With his frontier now stabilized and his control over northwestern Anatolia growing, Osman took a different approach, one that surprised both his allies and enemies. Instead of launching immediate invasions of Bursa and Iznik, Osman chose diplomacy. For the next 7 years, Osman did not launch any large-scale attacks on major Byzantine strongholds. He focused on internal consolidation, strengthening his administration and military. Diplomacy was a key strategy of Osman as well. He sought peaceful relations with regional Byzantine lords, particularly those who were neutral or hesitant to challenge him. This 7-year peace period was strategic. Osman used it to train new warriors, expand his intelligence networks, and build new alliances. While Osman strengthened his position, the Byzantine lords of Bursa and Iznik grew increasingly uneasy. They recognized that Osman's conquests were not random raids, but part of a larger, deliberate strategy. They feared Osman's influence over local Christian populations, who were beginning to see Ottoman rule as preferable. The Byzantines knew that this uneasy peace would not last forever. Indeed, Osman was merely biding his time, waiting for the right moment to strike. His victories at Karakahisar, Kulakahisar, and Ertugrul had shaken Byzantine rule in the region, prompting alarm among the remaining Tekfurs. Yet despite his growing power, Osman did not always rely on direct military conquest. Instead, he employed diplomatic cunning and deception, often using the very arrogance of his enemies against them. One such episode would unfold in Bilecik, a Byzantine stronghold that had long been considered untouchable. Bilecik was one of the few remaining Byzantine fortresses in northwestern Anatolia, positioned on key trade routes that connected the Byzantine cities of Bursa, Iznik, and the Black Sea ports. Its control was vital for Osman's long-term goal of cutting off the Byzantines from their major strongholds. Historically, relations between the Kayi Turks and the Byzantine lords of Bilecik had been cordial, stretching back to the time of Osman's father, Ertugrul Ghazi. The Kayi tribe had a long-standing agreement with the Tekfur of Bilecik, allowing them to leave their weapons and valuables in Bilecik's safekeeping while they moved into the mountains to graze their livestock during the summer months. In return, the Tekfur received generous gifts from the Kayi, including honey, cream, and furs. However, as Osman's power and influence expanded, this fragile peace began to fracture. The Tekfur of Bilecik, like many of his Byzantine counterparts, had grown increasingly wary of Osman's ambitions. What had once been a small nomadic principality was now a growing Islamic state, a direct threat to Byzantine rule. The Tekfur of Bilecik no longer trusted Osman and began forging alliances with other Byzantine lords, notably the Tekfurs of Yarhisar and Ertugrul. This alliance, formed in desperation, had one objective: to eliminate Osman before his power became unstoppable. The Tekfur of Yarhisar devised a plan to lure Osman into a trap under the guise of diplomacy. He arranged a lavish wedding, announcing that his daughter, Holoferia, would be married to the Tekfur of Bilecik. The Byzantines sent invitations not just to Osman, but to many powerful lords in the region, hoping to convince Osman that this was a gesture of goodwill rather than an act of war. The real plan, however, was far more sinister. The wedding was a ruse, designed to isolate Osman from his army and assassinate him while he was unarmed and surrounded by Byzantine forces. The Tekfurs planned to launch a coordinated attack on Sogut and Kara-Kahisar, eliminating Osman's entire household while their leader was trapped at the wedding. With Osman dead, the remaining Kayi leaders would be leaderless, and the Byzantines could reclaim lost territories. However, what the Byzantines did not anticipate was that Osman had a powerful friend among them, Mihal Kose, the Lord of Harmankaya. Mihal was no ordinary Byzantine lord. He had long been a close confidant of Osman, witnessing his rise to power firsthand. Unlike other Byzantine lords, Mihal saw Osman not as a barbarian raider, but as a just ruler. Over time, a deep friendship developed between them, built on mutual respect and admiration. When Mihal learned of the wedding plot, he knew he had to act. He secretly rode to Osman's camp under the cover of night and delivered his warning. "Beware, friend, for this invitation is not of goodwill. They do not wish to celebrate with you, but to end you. Bilecik, Ertugrul, and Yarhisar stand against you, and their swords are drawn." Armed with this knowledge, Osman did not refuse the invitation. Instead, he used the Tekfur's own arrogance against them. Osman summoned his closest commanders, and together they devised a bold counterattack. Their strategy had two objectives: capture Bilecik without a direct siege, which could take months, and eliminate the Byzantine threat in one decisive blow by attacking the wedding at Sakarpanar. Osman sent a group of his best warriors disguised as women, carrying baskets of honey, cream, and silk as wedding gifts for the Tekfur. The Byzantine guards, accustomed to this tradition, let them in without suspicion. Inside their baskets were hidden weapons. Once inside, the disguised warriors seized the gates, slaughtered the guards, and took control of the fortress in a matter of minutes. At the same time, Turgut Alp and his men, who had been hiding in the forest, stormed Bilecik's walls. Meanwhile, Osman and his warriors rode to the wedding at Sakirpanar, concealed inside barrels filled with honey and oil. As the Byzantines drank heavily and feasted, Osman's warriors burst out from their hiding places. The Tekfur of Bilecik was captured and executed on the spot. The Tekfur of Yarhisar attempted to flee, but was hunted down and killed. while the remaining Byzantine lords, too drunk to fight, were either slaughtered or taken prisoner. By the end of the night, Osman had destroyed the Byzantine coalition in a single stroke. Osman did not stop at Bilecik, however. After securing the fortress, he marched on Yarhisar, taking the city without resistance. At the same time, Turgut Alp laid siege to Inegol, using siege engines provided by the Seljuk Sultan. Within weeks, all three Byzantine strongholds had fallen into Ottoman hands. With Bilecik, Inegol, and Yarhisar under his rule, Osman had completed his first major territorial expansion. Rather than destroying the Christian population, Osman once again offered them security and fair governance. Churches remained intact, and Christian communities were allowed to worship freely. Byzantine merchants, seeing better economic opportunities under Ottoman rule, remained in the cities, and many Greek artisans and tradesmen, impressed by Osman's justice, voluntarily converted to Islam. The fall of Bilecik and the surrounding strongholds marked a turning point. Osman no longer needed to answer to the Seljuks. In 1299, Osman declared full independence, minting coins in his name and issuing decrees under his authority. The Ottoman Beylik was no longer a frontier principality. It had become a fully independent state. This was the dawn of the Ottoman Empire, an entity that would expand to become one of the most powerful empires in history. From the ashes of fractured Anatolia, Osman Ghazi had laid the foundations of a legacy that would endure for centuries. The road ahead led to Bursa, Iznik, and ultimately Constantinople itself. But first, Osman had one final enemy left to conquer, the mighty city of Bursa. By the early 14th century, the Byzantine presence in Anatolia was crumbling. Years of war, internal strife, and economic decline had left their territories fragmented and vulnerable. The once mighty Byzantine Empire, which had stretched across 3 continents, was now reduced to a handful of strongholds in Anatolia, struggling to maintain control. Of these remaining cities, Iznik was one of the most important. A former imperial capital, Iznik was a religious, military, and economic center, and its loss would further cripple Byzantine influence in the region. Yet even as Byzantine rule weakened, their remaining lords, or tekfurs, clung desperately to power. They sought to rally their forces, forging alliances in a last-ditch effort to resist the rising might of Osman Ghazi and his warriors. What followed was a battle for the future of Anatolia, one that would test Osman's strategic genius, his warriors' resolve, and Byzantium's ability to endure. Since the Fourth Crusade and the Latin occupation of Constantinople, Iznik had served as the Byzantine capital in exile. It was a city of immense historical significance, where emperors had ruled and where the First Council of Nicaea had laid the foundations of Christian doctrine. However, by the time of Osman's rise, the city had become a shadow of its former self. The city's governor was corrupt and ruthless, prioritizing personal wealth over the well-being of his people. According to the Byzantine historian George Pachymeres, the clergy and nobility despised him, accusing him of heresy and abuse of power. The city's defenses were outdated, relying on walls that had once withstood Arab sieges in the 8th century, but were now in disrepair. Most crucially, Iznik was isolated from other Byzantine territories. The surrounding countryside had fallen to Osman's forces, cutting off vital supply routes. With the city ripe for conquest, Osman turned his gaze to Iznik, knowing that its capture would deal a mortal blow to Byzantine rule in northwestern Anatolia. Fresh from victories at Bilecik, Yarhisar, and Inegol, Osman understood that a direct assault on Iznik would be costly and time-consuming. Instead, he devised a multi-pronged strategy. Before attacking Iznik, Osman needed a strategic base of operations, a city that could serve as a supply hub, a military outpost, and a seat of governance. The fortress town of Yenishehir, located halfway between Iznik and Bursa, was the perfect target. Yenishehir controlled vital roads leading to Bursa, Iznik, and the Byzantine-controlled Marmara coastline. Its fertile lands could sustain a growing army, while its proximity to Byzantine territory allowed for constant raids and supply disruptions. By taking Yenishehir, Osman would cut Iznik off from the outside world, isolating it even further. In a swift and brutal campaign, Osman's forces stormed Yenishehir, overwhelming its defenders and forcing the local Byzantine garrison to surrender. He established Yenishehir as his new capital, fortifying its walls and using it as a launching pad for the eventual siege of Iznik. With Yenishehir secure, Osman tightened the noose around Iznik. He stationed garrisons at Koperhisar and key mountain passes, ensuring no reinforcements could reach the city by land. There, Osman built a watchtower near Iznik, allowing his scouts to monitor Byzantine movements and intercept supply caravans. His forces raided surrounding villages, destroying Byzantine farms, bridges, and roads, making it nearly impossible for the city to receive aid. For months, the siege took its toll. Food and water ran scarce, and desperation spread within the city walls. The Byzantine governor, unable to control the growing unrest, sent an urgent plea to the Byzantine emperor, Andronikos II Palaiologos. Despite his empire's weakened state, Andronikos knew that losing Iznik would be disastrous. To prevent Osman from seizing the city, he assembled a relief army of 7,000 men, composed of Thracian and Macedonian mercenaries, seasoned warriors who had fought in Balkan wars, Byzantine cavalry from Thessaloniki, trained in hit-and-run tactics. These were reinforced with troops from the Tekfurs of Bursa, Kite, and Kestel, who feared Osman's growing power. Commanding this army was George Muzalan, an experienced Byzantine general known for his defensive tactics and disciplined formations. Muzalan hatched a two-pronged plan: launch a naval expedition to reinforce Iznik from the Marmara Sea and march a land army toward Yenishehir, forcing Osman to lift the siege and fight on two fronts. This plan, if executed correctly, could crush Osman's army and reclaim lost territory. When Osman's scouts reported the approach of Muzalan's army, he realized he could not fight on both fronts. Rather than risk being surrounded, he made the difficult decision to temporarily lift the siege of Iznik and prepare for battle at Yenishehir. Muzalan marched confidently toward Yenishehir, believing that Osman was retreating in fear. However, Osman had no intention of fleeing. Instead, he prepared an ambush. Muzalan formed his army into a defensive phalanx, using spearmen in tight formations to withstand cavalry charges. Archers and crossbowmen positioned at the flanks, prepared to rain down arrows on advancing Ottomans. His cavalry remained in reserve, ready to strike once Osman's forces were engaged in melee combat. At dawn, Osman's light cavalry launched the first strike, harassing the Byzantine front lines and baiting them into breaking formation. When the Byzantine cavalry moved forward to counterattack, Osman's hidden reserve struck from the flanks. A fierce melee ensued, with Ottoman warriors hacking through the enemy ranks, while archers rained arrows on the Byzantine center. As the battle raged, the morale of Muzalan's infantry began to falter. Witnessing the disintegration of their cavalry and overwhelmed by the relentless Ottoman assaults, the Byzantine foot soldiers wavered. Despite Muzalan's repeated orders to hold the line, panic spread through the ranks. One by one, soldiers abandoned their positions, discarding their shields and fleeing the battlefield. With the infantry in full retreat and the cavalry decimated, the Byzantine army collapsed. Muzalan himself narrowly escaped, leaving behind a battlefield strewn with Byzantine dead and captured soldiers. Thousands of Byzantine soldiers were killed or captured, eliminating Byzantium's last hope of reclaiming the region. The victory was decisive, cementing Osman's reputation as a brilliant military leader. The spoils of war from this victory were substantial. Ottoman forces captured a significant number of prisoners, weapons, and supplies, further bolstering their military capabilities. News of Osman's triumph spread rapidly across Anatolia, drawing a new wave of Ghazis, artisans, and scholars to his banner. Within months, the size of Osman's army exceeded that of the Byzantine forces in the region, giving the Ottomans a strategic advantage. This influx of manpower and resources also transformed the nascent Ottoman state. Craftsmen and merchants revitalized the economy, while Sufi scholars and dervishes enriched its cultural and spiritual life. Yenishehir flourished as the Ottoman capital, becoming a hub of trade, governance, and military planning. And with his base secured, the time had come. Bursa was the next target. It was the beginning of the 14th century. For the Byzantine Empire, Osman's victories were a disaster. The loss of Karakahhisar, Balaychik, Yarhisar, and Inagol had sent shock waves through Constantinople, exposing the empire's weakened grip over Anatolia. Emperor Andronikos II was heavily criticized for his inability to mount an effective defense against the Ottoman advance. With the Byzantine treasury nearly empty, hiring mercenaries or raising a new army was nearly impossible. Many Byzantine lords, once confident in imperial support, now began negotiating with Osman, seeing his rule as a more stable alternative to the distant and declining Byzantine emperor. Despite this, the Byzantines attempted one final stand, rallying their remaining tekfurs to form a defensive alliance against Osman. The strategy was simple: defend Iznik, Bursa, and Izmit at all costs. With the Byzantine alliance in disarray, Osman resumed his siege of Iznik. The city had already suffered during his earlier blockade, but the arrival of a Byzantine relief army had forced Osman to withdraw temporarily. Now, with the Byzantines weakened, he tightened his grip on the city. His forces cut off trade routes and supply lines, ensuring that no reinforcements or resources could reach the city. Osman stationed troops at key access points, effectively isolating Iznik from the rest of the empire, and a watchtower was constructed, allowing Ottoman scouts to monitor any movement around the city. Inside Iznik, desperation took hold. The Byzantine governor, already unpopular for his cruel rule, found himself unable to maintain order. The clergy, merchants, and common citizens, suffering under Osman's blockade, began looking for a way out. Osman's forces did not launch a full-scale assault. Instead, they starved the city into submission, allowing time to weaken its defenders. The fall of Iznik was inevitable. Its capture would mark another step in Osman's march toward dominance in Anatolia. As the Ottoman state grew in strength, its conquest brought it ever closer to the gates of Byzantium's last major strongholds, Bursa, Iznik, and Izmit. These cities, with their towering walls and strategic locations, were some of the last remnants of Byzantine rule in Anatolia. By this time, Osman was no longer a young warrior. Years of battle, leadership, and hardship had taken their toll. With his health declining, he began entrusting more military operations to his son, Osman Ghazi. Osman knew that a direct assault on Bursa would require significant preparation. Instead, he chose a strategy of encirclement and attrition, capturing surrounding towns and fortresses to isolate the city. Osman first focused on securing Bursa's surrounding forts, ensuring that no Byzantine reinforcements could reach the city. Kite, Kestel, and Ulubat, all strategically positioned, were swiftly conquered. He constructed 2 Ottoman fortresses near Bursa, effectively blocking the city's supply routes. The siege was as much psychological as it was military. Osman's forces controlled the countryside, leaving Bursa's defenders with no hope of resupply or reinforcements. Recognizing that intimate knowledge of the region's geography and Byzantine defenses was crucial, Osman turned to an unlikely ally, Mihal Koze, the Tekfur of Harmankaya. Mihal had been a long-time acquaintance of Osman, their relationship built on mutual respect. As he witnessed the decline of Byzantine rule and the justice of Osman's governance, Mihal decided to convert to Islam. This moment was deeply emotional. Osman himself led Mihal in reciting the Shahada, welcoming him as Abdullah Mihal. Mihal's knowledge of Byzantine military tactics, defenses, and fortifications proved invaluable in Osman's future campaigns. His descendants, the Mihaloglu family, would later become legendary Ottoman raiders, striking deep into Europe for centuries to come. With Mihal by his side, Osman intensified his efforts to subjugate Bursa's surrounding territories. The Tekfurs of Lefke and Sadirlik voluntarily surrendered, pledging their loyalty to Osman. Others, such as the Tekfur of Lubluchehisar, submitted without a fight, retaining his position under Ottoman rule. Some of Osman's commanders, such as Samsa Sargent, urged him to remove these Tekfurs, fearing they could rebel later. However, Osman took a more pragmatic approach, arguing that offering peaceful submission would encourage other Byzantine lords to surrender without bloodshed. This strategy paid off, further expanding Ottoman influence without unnecessary warfare. However, not all Byzantine lords were willing to surrender peacefully. The Tekfur of Akhisar refused to submit, believing he could withstand an Ottoman assault. A pitched battle erupted outside the city walls, with Osman's forces launching relentless cavalry charges. Despite the Byzantine defenders' initial resilience, they broke under pressure, retreating inside the fortress. After a brief siege, Osman's forces stormed the city, capturing it in a decisive Ottoman victory. Encouraged by this success, Osman advanced toward Gaiv, another fortified Byzantine city. However, rather than engage in prolonged siege warfare, Osman used deception and surprise tactics. His forces launched a nighttime assault, catching the defenders off guard. Within a few hours, Gaiv fell to the Ottomans, further weakening Byzantine control in the region. The fall of Akhisar, Gaive, and surrounding towns marked a turning point. These victories served to set the stage for a rising star that would determine the future of Ottoman Empire, Osman Ghazi. With the Ottoman state expanding rapidly and Osman's health becoming worse by day, the next phase of its rise would rest on the shoulders of Osman Ghazi's son and successor, Osman Ghazi. As the Byzantines reeled from their losses and the Ottoman influence spread across Anatolia, the transition of power from Osman to Orhan marked a defining moment in history, one that would shape the destiny of the empire for centuries to come. However, before assuming the mantle of leadership, Orhan had to prove himself as a warrior and strategist. His path to the throne would be forged in battle, tested by cunning, and solidified through conquest. While the Ottomans continued their westward expansion, new threats emerged from within Anatolia. A band of Shavdar Tatars, known for their lawlessness and brutality, launched a series of raids into Ottoman territory. These Tatars were mercenary raiders, remnants of Mongol-aligned Turkic forces who had turned to banditry after the decline of Mongol influence in Anatolia. They attacked Ottoman villages, plundered markets, and disrupted trade routes, leaving destruction and fear in their wake. Reports quickly reached Osman Ghazi, who, now in his later years, turned to his son Orhan to deal with the crisis. Realizing that a swift and decisive response was necessary, Orhan mustered a force of a few hundred men and set off to hunt down the Tatar raiders. His plan was as bold as it was effective. He lured the Tatars into a trap by feigning a weak and disorganized retreat, drawing them into a narrow valley at Oyunashisar. Once the Tatars were fully engaged, his hidden forces struck from the sides, catching the bandits completely off guard. The ambush was devastating. The Tatars, unable to maneuver, were cut down in a brutal melee. Their leader was captured alive, while the remaining raiders scattered, leaving behind their stolen loot. Orhan's brilliant strategy and battlefield leadership did not go unnoticed. Upon returning to Karakohisar with the captured Tatar leader, Orhan was met with cheers and admiration from his people. Osman Ghazi himself recognized his son's abilities, acknowledging that Orhan had proven himself worthy of greater responsibilities. Seeing the loyalty and respect Orhan commanded, Osman decided to entrust him with a critical new mission: the capture of Caracas Fortress, one of the last major Byzantine outposts in northwestern Anatolia. Caracas Fortress, perched on the banks of the Sakarya River, was one of the best defended Byzantine fortifications in the region. Taking it would require not just brute force but cunning and strategy. Understanding the fortress's strengths and weaknesses, Orhan devised a multi-pronged strategy. He divided his forces into 3 groups and positioned one group behind the fortress, lying in wait. A second group hidden in a nearby forest, ready to strike, while the third, led by Orhan himself, approached the fortress openly, seemingly vulnerable. Orhan's visible force acted as bait, drawing the attention of the Byzantine Tekfur of Caracas. The Tekfur, overconfident, launched a full-scale attack, believing that he could easily crush the smaller Ottoman force. As the Byzantine soldiers left the fortress to pursue Orhan's retreating troops, the hidden Ottoman units moved in from behind, scaling the walls unopposed. By the time the Tekfur and his forces realized the deception, it was too late. The Ottomans already controlled the fortress. Surrounded and outmaneuvered, the Byzantines were routed in a final engagement, securing a stunning victory for Orhan Ghazi. The fall of Caracas was a major milestone. It further weakened Byzantine defenses in the region, bolstered Orhan's reputation as a military genius, solidifying his position as Osman's heir. With Caracas secured, Orhan turned his attention toward Akiyasu, expanding Ottoman influence along the Sakarya River. While Orhan was leading Ottoman forces on the battlefield, Osman Ghazi's health was in sharp decline. Yet, even on his deathbed, Osman remained fixated on one goal: the capture of Bursa. Bursa was one of the wealthiest cities in the Byzantine Empire, known for its trade, silk production, and strategic location. The city was heavily fortified but isolated from other Byzantine strongholds. Its fall would not only mark the end of Byzantine rule in the region, but also provide the Ottomans with a new capital. With Osman too ill to lead, Orhan took charge of the siege of Bursa, employing. After years of attrition, on April 6, 1326, Bursa's weary defenders surrendered without bloodshed. The city's residents welcomed Ottoman rule, tired of Byzantine mismanagement. Bursa was declared the new Ottoman capital, symbolizing the transition from a small beylik to a powerful state. As news of Bursa's fall reached Osman, he knew his life's mission was complete. Calling Orhan to his side, he offered his final words of wisdom: protect the state treasury, strengthen the religion and the state, show justice and kindness to your people, value the scholars, the virtuous, and the learned. Be just and steadfast in your rule. Trust in Allah and guard your people against enemy invasion and oppression. With these words, Osman Ghazi, the founder of the Ottoman state, passed away. Osman's death marked the end of an era but the beginning of something far greater. The capture of Bursa was not just a military victory, it was the culmination of Osman's vision. His son, Orhan Ghazi, now inherited an empire in the making. The Ottomans had transitioned from frontier warriors to rulers of cities, trade routes, and vast lands. With the Byzantine presence in Anatolia all but shattered, the Ottomans stood on the precipice of greatness. New challenges, new battles, and new conquests lay ahead. But one thing was certain: Osman Ghazi's dream had come to life. Thus, the rise of the Ottoman Empire had truly begun.